So first I'm just going to introduce our panelists. We have Jackie Lawrence here, who you just saw the video of her son. I met Jackie, I was home watching the news and I heard about the case, and I started reaching out to local activists here in Las Vegas to see if they could connect me to her. And it was actually through, I think, Instagram that I got connected to her daughter, who connected me to her. So in this day and age of social media, it's a lot easier to reach out to families. And I've noticed that difference from starting back in 2009, which was very difficult to connect with people. And now a lot of people are on social media, so it's much easier, which is a very positive thing and creates an opportunity for us to really respond to this kind of violence as a community. So that's Jackie Lawrence, and then here we have Uncle Bobby, Cephus Johnson. I call him Uncle Bobby because he's known as the people's uncle in the movement. Very happy to have him here. This is the third panel that I've hosted and organized that Uncle Bobby has been on. I met him back in 2010 in September in New York City. We hosted a Stolen Lives panel, and he came and he talked about his nephew, Oscar Grant, who was killed by BART police officer Johannes Mehserle. Is actually probably should be one of the most well-known cases in recent police brutality history, because it's the only case where, aside from drunk driving, where a police officer has served time for taking a life of a civilian. So despite the fact that he only served like maybe, 6 months? 11 months in prison, right? But at the end of the day, it's still an epoch, and he has an incredible analysis. He's been working really hard to unite families. I was working on uniting families on the East Coast, and he's been working on uniting families on the West Coast. So now it's great to be here and to meet with him and to combine our efforts. So this is Uncle Bobby. His also, just to mention, he was an advisor for the film Fruitvale Station, which is based off of the life of Oscar Grant. And he also is he started the Oscar Grant Foundation and also the Love Not Blood campaign, which you can find the website URL on the bios on the handout. So I'm going to first start asking Jackie a couple of questions. As you guys know, you're familiar with her story already. Jackie, I wanted to ask you, in particular, what are some things that you have needed help with and support with that you haven't received from the state or people that have been responsible for what's happened to your family?
Thank you. Well, what people don't know is when this type of stuff happens, it doesn't just happen to the person that gets murdered. It happens to the whole family. It completely tears your family apart. I'm sorry, it's still new to me. We have all needed therapy. It's been an income loss. It's just really been tragic on the whole entire family. So, going down all the way from my granddaughters, that was their uncle, that was their brother. They grew up in the same house with him, and they're 13. And how do they deal with this for the rest of their life? So, I'm noticing that when this type of stuff happens, there's not really a lot of help out there for you, unless you have the big bucks, because I have great insurance, but as I was telling Lisa, they pay for 2 visits, and that's it. So, people need to look at the whole picture instead of, what happens to the whole entire family. It's not just the person who passes, but there's a whole entire family that,
Can you give us an idea of how Keith's immediate children are affected?
Well, Keith has 2 daughters that he had while he was alive. They're now in therapy, and they're only 4 and 7, and they're in therapy. They don't sleep. They don't understand. The 7-year-old is having a lot of difficulty with it. He also had, his girlfriend was also pregnant with his 3rd daughter, which will never know her dad. She will never know him. anybody who thinks that doesn't cause children problems, it will. I mean, we're gonna have to start her off in therapy, you know, at a very young age because of it.
And can you kind of divulge on how it's affected you in your life?
Well, I tell people, you didn't just take away my son, you took away my life. I struggle every day to try to put a smile on my face. It puts you in a coma. I don't even know where I've been for the last year. I'm just now starting to come out of it. We're about to celebrate his year of passing.
One thing I wanted to ask was how has the fact that your son was killed in Las Vegas and he didn't live here and most of his friends and family lived elsewhere, including yourself, how has that affected your ability to fight for your son's case?
Well, it's been hard because, like I stated, I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so, we try to come as much as possible to put it out there, to put his name out there, keep it alive. But, we have traveling costs and all of that stuff. It's been kind of hard. It's been hard we've been writing letters, we've been, out there at the courthouses, we've been trying to do what we can do, but it is difficult when we don't live here.
Do you have anything else to say, Jackie? No? Okay.
Thank you for having me today.
Okay, so moving on to Uncle Bobby and my questions. So I was interested in actually Uncle Bobby talking about his experience in terms of successfully indicting the officer and successfully convicting him. I'd like for you to share your experience about that.
Okay, first, just a couple of questions. How many of you actually heard of Oscar Grant? If so, raise your hand. Okay, pretty much the entire audience. How many of you actually seen the movie Fruitvale Station? Okay, about maybe half of the audience. I'm not going to diverge a lot into Oscar's specific case and what happened because it's all documented on YouTube. And you can actually witness the shooting itself, again, on YouTube. And also, you can get a glimpse of who Oscar was, and especially what he was to us in our lives through the movie Fruitvale Station. And so that you'll know, Fruitvale Station is 99.5% accurate. And Brian Krugler, the director, Forrest Whitaker, Octavia Spencer, Michael B. Jordan, Melody Diaz, and all of them also spend a lot of time at our home so that they can really grasp and get the feeling of who Oscar Grant was. So the question that Vanessa, first of all, thank you, University of Las Vegas, for allowing me to be able to share some time and space. And, and my experience with you. And also, Vanessa, thank you again for having me to sit on the panel. The very first panel I sat on, when I came to this pain, was in New York that Vanessa had put together. I was actually at the Congressional Black Caucus speaking at the criminal justice reform that was sponsored by John Conyers at that time, concerning the murder of my nephew and my hopes in going to Congress and people, black folks, speaking about this pain, that we can garner some support in getting justice for Oscar. In this movement, many of us will go through many different changes in our perspective on what's going to bring real freedom, justice, and equality to all. So let me step back and think about this question. First of all, so that you all know, it was the community that embraced us, stood with us, cried with us, went back and forth to court with us, prayed for us, prayed with us, but most importantly, utilized the First Amendment right to speak to the very injustice of what they saw happen to Oscar Grant. It was because of that community that helped us stand up, to have some voice, to even have some hope that we might in some way get some form of justice. But besides just the community, I can remember going to speaking to the ILW Longshoremen Union in San Francisco. And the Longshoremen Union actually endorsed this pain that we felt as a family and began to support and connect it with the community. And now we had labor and we had the community sticking together. But in addition to that, there were some, I have to say, political figures in the Bay Area that were more progressive, that also came in line with the ILWU and the community. The ILWU was really instrumental in getting labor force involved. So I had to set up to speak with the Alameda County Labor Council as well as the Oakland Labor Council, and was able to have them feel the pain, and then they also began to endorse. And so we had not just labor involved, not just the community, but we had selected people that felt that what happened to Oscar was so egregious that they had a right to speak to this issue. So with that combination, we can say for the first time in California state history, for the first time in California state history, an officer was charged, arrested, convicted, and sent to jail. And now we don't count that as a victory, but we do count it as historic. So it's extremely important. And every time I say that in the state of California, and really pretty much everywhere else, there's a major applause. If you probably didn't hear what I'm saying, because Vanissa shared, and as you've seen on the video, it's extremely rare, if it happens, that an officer is ever convicted for the murder of someone that is either black, brown, or marginalized white. This is just a reality, and there's an analysis, and it has to be correct in us understanding how do we move forward and really bringing justice to those families that suffer this pain. But because of the ILWU and the community of Oakland and the Bay Area and LA, and because of those selected people that felt what they saw was wrong, I'm saying that it can be done. And it was done. The ILWU shut down the ports down in Northern California up the West Coast in regards to the murder of Oscar Grant, which meant that international cargo came to a halt. This is a message to all of us if we really want to understand where our power lies and really bring a systemic change and real freedom, justice, and equality to all. How do we, in essence, bring that into reality? Now, there's much money in Vegas. I'm kind of jumping ahead, talking about some methods that really brings freedom, justice, and equality, but the economic piece is critical. Those international dollars that was affected because of the cargo shutdown was critical to the state of California. And that's, in essence, it was critical to having Johannes Mehserle really arrested, charged, convicted, and sent to jail. Now, they did everything in their power to not let that happen, but there were some things that took place that forced it to happen. And so we have to be clear in our understanding and our analysis on how to move forward and get justice. And as we see all around the country, there's always one element that's always standing out front, and that is the community to a degree. Mehserle, how many of you read the book, Mass Incarceration in the Time of Color Blindness, Mehserle Alexander's book? So thank you for those who have read it. For those who really want to understand what it's going to take, Mehserle Alexander, Mass Incarceration in the Time of Color Blindness is called The New Jim Crow. It's a critical book to be read. I feel myself getting really long-winded, so I don't want to over-talk this because I can't. But this is very critical to our understanding. My wife always tells me there's a time for me to share my emotion, there's a time to teach. I'm kind of in between that stage of expressing my emotion because I can get really taken into the emotional aspect, with the murder of my nephew, Oscar Grant. And I didn't even really introduce myself, so let me do that first of all. I am affectionately known to the community as Uncle Bobby. I am the uncle of Oscar Grant. Oscar's mother, Wanda, is my baby sister, so that you can understand the relationship. And then also Oscar being my first nephew, we had an extremely close relationship, and so he was like a son to me, very, very close. And I was extremely pained and angry when he was murdered, and that type of anger that was really more apt to be reckless anger. And I'll say this and then kind of step back and let some questions be asked. But this is for all of you. so that you can hear what I'm saying. On New Year's Eve, 2008, Oscar was really heavy on my heart. And I couldn't understand why he was speaking to me in my spirit. But it forced me to respond to that call. And I texted him and I said, Uncle, love you, God loves you, God loves your family. Hour and a half later, he was murdered. And when I saw that video, I can remember falling out. Just really just blanking out. But when I came back, I was so angry, that type of anger that was really unhealthy. Because there was some damage that was going to be done, real reckless damage. But God brought back to memory that blessing that I had to tell Oscar that I love him, tell him that God loves him and loves his family. And I'm so thankful for that. And it was then that I knew that my mission was much more than just being angry and destructive, but building a movement so that people can see this essence of what police terrorism really is and how to connect with other families across the United States to really bring this freedom, justice, and equality to all of us. And to really work with families that have lost loved ones in hopes that they can also achieve some form of justice. And so let me just stop right there. And these, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment came into place, which was really challenging. In other words, let me just say it like this. When emancipation took place, black codes came into place and pretty much put us back into slavery. Then we fought, and we got the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment in place. And right after that, the Jim Crow essence took off the air. And during that time period, and Sean King, how many of you are familiar with Sean King, New York Times writer? Well, anyway, look up Sean King and read some of his writings, because he just launched a national injustice boycott that's been a call out for all of us. So all of you should be aware of this, because it's going to take all of us to really bring about this change. But anyhow, he shared with us that from 1892 to 1960, 3,445 young black men, women, and children were lynched. Okay, and which averaged really like 2 a week. Okay, and so we got that number in our head. Now we move on through time. The Jim Crow is in place. This young man named Emmett Till is killed. What really motivated the movement behind Martin Luther King was Emmett Till's mother, by leaving her casket open, and we all became outraged. This just can't happen again with another child. So again, just a message I like to drop this all the time, is that this is not about us today. What we're standing up for is for our babies and our grandbabies. Our failure to stand up and speak now, if we think it's bad now, and we don't speak, and we don't bring a change, what kind of life will our children have? What kind of life will our children have? So now we're moving through time. Let that resonate. And as we take a look at the essence of the Civil Rights Amendments came into place in 1964, Brown versus the Board of Education, and we had some successes, but then there was another backlash. Every time we make gains, there's a backlash, and we have to be prepared for that. And of course, right after that backlash, it was L.B. Johnson talking about law and order. And then we began to see an increase of police murders in the country. But we never really took statistics, except for the Department of Justice did, on how many murders took place. So in our assumption, these type of murders has always been happening. But I want to tell you a story about what happened with Oscar Grant. So on January 1st, Oscar Grant was murdered. Adolph Grimes out of New Orleans was murdered. And Rodney Tolan was shot in the back. He lived, but it was supposed to be a murder, but he survived that shooting. And Brian Gumble did a special on him. All 3 of them 22 years old. All 3 of them are black. All 3 of them in different states, but all 3 of them shot in the back doing nothing wrong. 19 days later, Obama was inaugurated. 2 weeks later, he hired Eric Holder as the top cop of the nation. 2 months later, Henry Louis Gates was going in his house. He was accosted by the police. Obama said that was stupid of the officer. Then had to apologize the next day because he said the words were a little too harsh, but he was under attack by the police union. And then he said, we're going to resolve this race issue or this issue concerning police by having a beer summit. And it was right after that beer summit that escalation of black life being murdered by the police took off. is unprecedented based on my research on how often we're being killed. And Vanessa said it right, on average, 1,000 to 1,500 or even more are killed per year, which is really now averaging not just every 28 hours, but every 8 hours or less that somebody is being killed by the police across this country. These numbers are real. And this cannot be equated to what happened during the 40s through the 60s through the 80s. You hear what I'm saying? The reality of what's happening today is more heinous than any time since, we'll say, from 1892, the last part of this, the lynching that was taking place in the United States. The number is outrageous and it's unbelievable. But what's even sad, during that time period of the lynching, only one white man was held accountable for lynching in those 60 years. One individual. And the only reason why he was held accountable because he had lynched so many people in such a heinous way that he had to be identified and dealt with. But in police shootings, we have officers that shoot, go back on the force, and shoot again. And when I say shoot again, I'm talking about kills again. So it's not overall the police themselves that are doing shooting. There's a small crew that allow the continue the shooting to go on and on and on and on. So I'm just sharing this backdrop with you to see that though we have technology and though we see it every day, and yes, it is real, but it's even more heinous today than it has ever been. And that the only way we're going to stop this is that we all have to come to the knowledge of this and become part of the movement to really bring about this real change. Because our failure to do this, again, will be a direct reflection of what happened to our babies as they begin to really be born and walk in this space, in this earth.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. I forgot we had a question. Go ahead.
It's okay. It's okay. First off, I would like to thank you all for sharing your narratives, and I would also like to send my deepest condolences. Even though I haven't personally experienced somebody dying at the hands of the police, it still deeply resonates with me that any member of my family, any one of my friends could be next. So my question for you all is, we talk a lot about accountability and justice, so what is you all's ideal vision of justice? Like, does that look like demilitarization of the police force? Like, is it the death penalty for the officer that shot, life in prison? So, like, what does it mean for justice in you all's cases? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, those lives don't come back. So, like, what does justice look like, and what does accountability look like?
Justice for me is, I want the police to be accountable for what they do. Doesn't mean they have to get the life, they don't be on death row. They just need to be accountable. When you do something, if I was to go out and shoot somebody today, what would happen to me? It should be no difference because you have a badge. I think that once they start becoming accountable, we'll see a lot of this stopping. And I did want to bring up something when they were talking about we need to get out there together. Now, we do need to get out together, and I see a lot of people say, well, African Americans, it's not just African Americans. Like I said, it's hurting more than just African Americans. I'm not African American, and look what it's done to me. So we all need to come together, whites, Mexicans, Hispanic, everybody needs to come together and try to make a change.
I guess if I was to attempt to answer that question, accountability is critical. For me, Johannes Mehserle was supposed to be in jail for 14 years, just based on the charges. He was charged for second-degree murder, but he actually got off with involuntary manslaughter, which was a 2 to 4 year term. But also, because the murder was done with a gun, he also received in the state of California a gun enhancement charge, which was automatically 10 years. So we knew at a minimum that he would have done 12 years and at a max 14 years. That was accountability. And that would have been some form of, in our appearance, in our feeling, justice served, right? Though really, in my anger, personally, despite the law, I would have liked to see him dead. That's just how I felt. But based on the law of the land, 14 years would have been accountability for the murder he committed on my nephew. And because the system, the racist criminal justice system did everything in its power to make sure that he didn't get that type of time, there is no accountability. There is no justice. And that's why I say it was not justice or victory, but it's history. You know, he went to jail for 11 months. He only went to jail for 11 months because the judge had no choice but to give him 11 months. But he did everything in his power by throwing a gun enhancement off the table, that's -10, and then saying because he's never been in trouble before, I'm going to give him a low term of 2 years in prison. But then he said, hold up, I'm also giving him 2 days served every day he was already spent in jail to make sure his time goes down under 12 months, which means he don't have to go to prison. Got it down to 11 months, and then sent him to Mehserle County Jail, where he was basically by himself, not subject to possibly being killed in prison or in jail. But, and then we don't know what kind of lifestyle he had in those 11 months in Mehserle County Jail, isolated from everybody. So, you know, there was much more comfort for him given. So, that is not accountability. Accountability is meaning that if an officer commits murder, he's held accountable just like you and I would be held if we committed the murder. That means he goes to prison. And if the sentence is a life in prison, then he do life in prison. If the sentence is 30 years in prison, then he do 30 years in prison. Families want accountability. Want you to be held responsible for the crime you perpetrated on a family. And if it was wrong crime, in other words, that the video says this young man did not have a gun and you shot him 2 times in the back, like Walter Scott, for example. Well, you know, we heard what happened with, if you haven't heard what happened with that case, it was a hung jury. Now his family's got to get down on their knees and pray and ask God why. All they wanted was him to be held accountable for the murder of their son, Walter Scott. All we wanted was him to be held accountable for the murder of Oscar Grant, and the same thing with Jackie and her family. You know, and so accountability is critical. And that then helps a family maybe even believe that the system works. Right now, me personally know the system is by design working the way it was designed, which is not for justice or accountability for my family or many of the other families that suffer the same harm.
I have a question. I have a lot of questions. Mr. Johnson, I saw that movie. My condolences to the panel. And I have a daughter. It was a tough movie too. You might have answered the question. 2 questions. I'm trying to make it quick. 13, 14, and 15 were established during the Reconstruction. Right after that, during that Jim Crow period, they were destroyed, pushed back on. And I think this is a fair question because I've heard in the conversation. Do you see that same parallel with Obama leaving in this new? Do you expect that same type of violence to take place, for lack of a better word? And two, I think you might answer the question, forms of protest. You know, protest comes in different forms. So what can a young student do to protest in your eyes?
2 great questions. Every time there is a possible gain that we, especially as black people, make, there's going to be some backlash. Part of the backlash was during Obama's era because, you know, as you know, he never really could do anything that represented us as black people. And so there was major struggle and kickback. But part of that suffering was us young men out here in this community that have seemed to have turned the police loose on the people. And so everybody has come clear that state violence is real. You know, and so the question becomes, are the police here to serve and protect the people, or are they here to serve and protect the state? And I'm pretty sure we all can answer today and say they're here to serve and protect the state. Now, the other part of the question that I believe you asked was, what is it that young people can do to deal with this issue? Harry Belafonte's mentor is Paul Robeson. And I may mess up the quote, but I'm going to try to say it because it's so critical. He says, artists are the radical voice of civilization. In other words, and I'm speaking for me, but artists are the radical voice of civilization. In other words, basically, if you're an artist, you got the gift of hip hop. It is your responsibility now to take that gift to transform and inform us through those lyrics. If you're a painter, you are to consciously paint the issues concerning that we're dealing with today to again awaken those that are not yet awakened. Poetry, I mean, artists, young people. Ryan Coogler was 22 years old, a student at USC. Yeah, he was in film school, but Oscar was so awakening to him that he began to focus on how to express on the big screen this heinous act of what's happening to black people. And he shared it through the love of how we love Oscar to the world, about Oscar could have been anybody's brother, because those who have seen the movie know that Oscar didn't represent just a young black man, but he represented someone in your family that you felt that you would have also felt that same pain for had that happened to that person, whether he'd been white, Latino, or Native, or Asian. It's critical to understand that. And so I say on a regular and consistent basis, this revolution will really explode when our gifted folks, you young people, are actively taking what God has given you and utilizing it to tell the world about the issues today through your expression. And so that is what I say is really critical and what's needed, because these young babies are shaped through that. Many of us were shaped through the arts. And I'll tell you what happened with Oscar, and as we see on a regular consistent basis across the country, the artistic expression that has taken off really was a flashpoint of what happened to Oscar. In Oakland, as we know, where the Black Panthers originated and where I as a family, or we as a family, was blessed to embraced by that community, that activist community, upheld us. But they not only just upheld us, they transformed us and the whole Bay Area and then the nation through the arts. So every individual that is murdered, there's a t-shirt that's made, an expression. There's artistic murals that are painted concerning that issue or that individual. And I don't care how, if the mass media don't explode on that person, the community does remember that person by bringing something in reverence to it. And that's young people that's doing that.
Thank you. I have two questions. My name is Maya. I'm the vice president of the Black Student Organization here. Thank you for sharing everything about yourselves. It's very, it makes me sad. But anyway.
I think the first question was, how do we get our children to be safe in a world that doesn't view them as people that have a right to life, or children that don't have a right to life? It's critical, especially as black people, to teach our children who they are, where they come from, and historically what they have done in this world. Because until we bring that love back within our own selves and into our own community, right, the dilution or the division of unity within our own culture remains. So, I believe that it is critical that black people understand how to build their own communities. There was a time when we had Black Wall Street in Tulsa, or cities that we had as our community. There is nothing wrong with having an African town. And because we don't see that, right, we then begin to continue to walk in fear. But when we begin to realize that we as a people, black people, have the same right and ability to build communities and own property, own land, right? And not be fearful that we're doing something that is considered racist, because Chinatown has a community built within themselves, and it's not an issue about them being racist. But anytime we begin to think that we putting something together outside of white folks, then we think that maybe we're being racist in a way, and that therefore it might not be right. And that keeps the power within our children diluted. We have to reestablish our historical reference of who we were, where we came from, and what we're about, and how we are just as equipped as anybody else to have our own communities built up, not torn down, not segregated, but it can be separate within a community. You know, and so we don't speak about that, about any other community doing that, and there's many communities that does that, and they're empowered. And they're not tripping on this race issue because their money is pooled within their own community. And then the second part of the question, if you could repeat it.
How do we get people to like fight with us, other people outside of us?
Right. Like Jackie said, right, this is a movement that is going to require all of us to deal with it.
Educate.
Right. We have to first say, you know what? Institutionalized racism is real, right? Structural racism is real. And those that are white, right, that can sit and see a system that has established institutionalized racism and not become a part of destroying institutionalized racism, unraveling structural racism, then is just as culpable. So we have a responsibility, all of us, that if we all want to be in a safe place where we can grow up in what the United States is supposed to represent, then it requires all of us to be a part of that movement. And that's the only way change is going to come. You know, it's one thing black folks being out there, or Latinos being out there, Asians being out there, but it's another when we all realize that we dealing, you know, I'm going to speak for me, right? And matter of fact, I didn't finish your question. Yes, the new presidency and his position and what he's doing and what he's setting up is going to be a major backlash on a whole bunch of people that don't fit in his space of white supremacy. And so we cannot be afraid to deal with this essence of this term called white supremacy and what it really represents. Because it's going to be the destruction of all of us if we fail to deal with it and call it what it is. And so yes, this is an issue that we're all required to deal with. Just like we're all not really happy about Trump being the president, but we're all willing to say something about it, we're going to have to do that. That's the only way change is going to come.
We have time for one more? Step up to the mic.
It's more comments than a question, but
I'm so sorry, I feel your pain, that's the first thing. I'm angry too. And the other thing was, Dick Gregory made a comment, and he said, like Rosa Parks, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This country feels it when you do something economic, or you don't do something economic. So if we withhold economics, I'm really disappointed that this room is not full. This is an issue that everybody should be concerned with, especially right now. And I mean, like the brother said, they make t-shirts. When you kill somebody, they make t-shirts. So for Christmas, if you do Christmas, I don't, but if you do it, go buy a t-shirt. Don't spend your money with these people who don't care about you. That's the first thing. So withhold the economics. And the next thing is, most of our folks are in the church still, sitting in the church, and I'm so angry that the churches don't do more. So if I were you, I would take this message to the churches, that's the black church, the Latino church, Asian churches, so that people can know. And the third thing, we need to have a platform in Washington, just like the Million Man March. We need to have a platform so everybody knows about police brutality, and we all need to get involved. So that's just my issue, and I'm really pissed that more people aren't doing this, and we need to forget about Trump. Trump and them are gonna do what they're gonna do. We need to do what we're gonna do, and more people will side with us. How we get people on our side is to come together and do things like we used to back in the 60s. I'm from the 60s, so that's how we do it.
Thank you. I want to add really quickly, I know we're getting ready to end. You know, Sean King, so a national boycott has been initiated, an act that is going to require all of us. And we decided, I should say, they decided 3 states. The 2 states are, or the 3 states are California, New York, and Standing Rock. Those are the primary 3 right now. And so the call out is that all of us understand the power through economics. And there's going to be a call for a specific entity. We'll just say Wells Fargo. And you must say to Wells Fargo, if you have an account there, right? I mean, you've been having an account for years with Wells Fargo. But you must say to Wells Fargo, if you got money invested in the pipeline in North Dakota at Standing Rock, and you don't pull your money out of there, I'm taking my money out of your account. We have to do that in a mass way to have the real effect that we want. And yes, last year on 10/10/15 in Washington, D.C., again, 1 million people came to Washington, D.C. Minister Farrakhan called for a big event, which was the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, and mass media didn't talk about it. But that was about the ability, especially of black folks, in our economic power. We spend $1.3 trillion per year and don't have no money because it goes out to community. So how powerful is our economic dollars? And I'm not just talking about black dollars now, because in real change to come, it's going to require all of us to take those entities that are spending money in areas that we don't like, and we take our money away from them. You know, Walmart is a good example. John Crawford killed, picked up a toy gun. You know, we should have been boycotting Walmart to a point where Walmart had to completely shut down. And that would send a message to every entity in the United States that the people is tired. And I'll say this at end. As you know, at Standing Rock, I've been up at Standing Rock, stayed 4 days there. We just had a victory, you know, but it's not over. But it was a victory. Though they were mistreating us, spraying us with cold water, shooting us with rubber bullets, gassing us, and spraying toxin over the head to make us sick, shutting down our internet, the people came together. It was 8,000 to 10,000 people up there in Standing Rock, North Dakota, where I was at. And yet, because we stood in a unified manner, and it was just Native, but it was everybody, we were able to stop that pipeline right now. They're counting on Trump pushing it through because he got money invested in it. But the fact is that when we come together, our unity is more powerful than an atomic bomb. And this is what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad tells us. So if we understand the power of our unifying ourselves together, then we can really bring systemic change in this country. But we got to unify ourselves to make that happen through the economic peace.
I want to close the first part of the event, panel discussion. I want to thank the panel again for coming out.